So it's been almost exactly 10 years since I published a video called 3 Reasons Why China Will Never Rule the World back in April of 2015. A lot has changed over the past decade, and a lot has changed over the past couple weeks. So we thought it would be a good idea to review this video and see how it holds up. I want to thank Loga, the guy who runs the Discord channel, for suggesting doing this video. The first thing that kind of hits me, it's sort of an inside baseball YouTube thing, but the fact that YouTube would allow a video that's less than 4 minutes long to be as successful as it was for this channel is definitely a shift. You guys may have noticed in recent years that I have to go longer and longer and longer. That's because YouTube prioritizes that for watch time. So anyway, but you're not here to talk about YouTube Inside Baseball. You're here to talk about geopolitics, things that have changed. I'll say right up front, I'm still pretty bullish on U.S. empire, despite the fact that Donald Trump got reelected, and despite the fact he is proving to be just as unpredictable and catastrophic as I expected him to be as president. I do believe that U.S. empire has got more years, more decades to run. That's my bias. That's where I was 10 years ago. Let's see if this video holds up.
Ni hao. Ni hao. Forget it. Hello all. So, depending on how you measure it, 2014 was probably the year when the Chinese economy finally surpassed the US economy. This is huge. We've been #1 for over a century. So does this mean we should all start learning Mandarin to talk to our new bosses? I don't think so, and here's 3 reasons why.
So just looking at that introduction, it's worth remembering where we were in 2015. Absolutely, this year, 2025, has not been a good year for the idea of U.S. primacy or dominance surviving very much longer. But most of the 10 years between 2015 and today have been worse for China than they have been for the United States, even though there's a full term of Donald Trump being president in that 10-year period. In 2015, China was still a mega growth story. It wasn't until the 2015-2016 years specifically where China's economic growth engine started to seriously falter. And in 2015, when I made that video, I was still living in this world where I expected like the norm to be China growing 8, 9, even 10% in GDP terms every year. That kind of ended very shortly after I made this video 10 years ago, back in 2015. China's growth since then has certainly outpaced that of the rest of the developed world, of the United States, Europe, by a lot, but not by as much as it had done in the sort of magical period from the late 1970s up until 2014, 2015 or so. There's a bunch of other stuff. In 2018, China announced that Xi Jinping was going to be president for essentially as long as he wanted to, so they had thrown out what had looked like from the outside to be a very impressive system of changing leaders in an orderly fashion every 10 years that had built up a lot of trust in China as a system, and that was sort of discarded in 2018. And then, of course, we had the 2020 COVID crisis, which looked very bad for China. Obviously, China handled some aspects of the COVID crisis a lot better than the United States and the rest of the developed world did. You know, they were able to keep COVID at 0, which was a very impressive accomplishment, which of course turned out to not be worth much because the United States was super spreading all over the place. And so really, like, most of the past decade hasn't been that great for China, especially when you consider how the decade before I made that video was going for China, which was really, really impressive, like world-beatingly impressive. So let's pop into the first reason why I thought China would never end up running the world.
The Chinese are kinda racist. Over the past 10 years, Chinese builders of infrastructure have done more for Africa than 100 years worth of Western missionaries and do-gooders. And the Africans hate them for it. Chinese companies import their own workers who keep to themselves and conduct themselves with obvious contempt for the countries whose future they are building. We in the West at least pretend to treat everybody equally. China is doing incredible good in the world, but no one will thank them for it until they change their attitudes. They will get better at this, but it will take time.
So yes, as I predicted, China has gotten a lot better on this issue. They have figured out so much about diplomacy, about public messaging. In part by having perhaps the worst failure of their public messaging ever, the whole wolf warrior diplomacy debacle. But they've learned a lot about how to handle social media, how to handle public relations more broadly, how to handle diplomacy. I talked about that in a video last year. The way that China isn't just improving dramatically, it's going to continue to improve dramatically. Their diplomatic skills are sort of just going to continue to go up.
What people fail to recognize is that China is incredibly new at this. Yes, China is an ancient civilization, 5,000 years of history, whatever. But in the context of an industrialized world, a modernized world where China is a great power, that's like a decade-old phenomenon, if that. The amount of economic growth that they've gone through have taken China over my lifetime, over my adulthood, from a minor player on the world stage to a major player on a world stage. And it's a world stage that they've never been a big player on in a technologically enabled industrialized fashion. So really, the Chinese political and diplomatic establishment are kind of like adolescents. And like any adolescent, the amount of development that China is going to go through over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is going to be extraordinary. Again, it's not a threat of economic growth. It's a threat of incredible development in political and diplomatic sophistication. China is going to get better and is getting much better at selling itself to the world. And the United States is not at all prepared for this.
So China has traveled leaps and bounds in the way that they portray themselves to the world, in the way that they treat other countries. But I do think we can go a little bit too far with this. I don't think it's unfair to say that China is still a fairly racist society, like all societies, of course, but it's still sort of just getting used to the idea that it is a wealthy country and what that means vis-a-vis how they treat everybody else. I had some folks mention that the reception, the rapturously positive reception of a YouTuber, I think called iShowSpeed, has been recently. He's an African-American gentleman who has been traveling through China and has been very, riotously welcomed. He's become tremendously successful, I think, in China and abroad by doing these extensive live streams of his journeys through China. And I think that's very heartening. I think that says nice things about YouTube. It says nice things about the YouTuber in question. It says nice things about the way that the Chinese public does a better job of welcoming strangers than they used to. But there's a difference between the reception of a very clearly African American person who is clearly representing U.S. media or world media and the way that is handled versus the way that China might handle migrant workers or their relationships with countries that might owe China money. We shouldn't call this issue entirely solved, but I do think that the most important issue that I was worried about 10 years ago was the ways that Chinese racial attitudes were hurting them and keeping them from being able to benefit from money or loans or construction that they had done across the world. There's actually, because China's economy is not as rampagingly out of control growing as it used to be, there's actually a lot less Chinese money on offer for these sorts of things, these sorts of projects, which of course necessitates China being more diplomatic and getting better at all these softer aspects of diplomacy. And I think China absolutely is, but I don't want to give the impression that I'm saying that China's racism problem is solved any more than the US's racism problem is solved. And even in the era of post-woke Donald Trump, I think that the United States still probably has more of the basic skills of treating other countries. Now that I say that, I think in the Donald Trump era, we do not have those basic skills. But what's interesting is even Donald Trump's morons like Marco Rubio when they're acting in their own capacity, have instincts of equality or pretending to equality that I think are a lot stronger than China's are still at this point. Though obviously, I guess there's a sort of a graph here of China's diplomacy screw-ups and racism declining as the United States' diplomacy and racism screw-ups accelerate. So this is something that I didn't expect the United States to get so much worse on this metric over the past 10 years, and China has definitely improved. But there's more work for both China and the United States to do on this front of hiding racism and working up back towards more civilized diplomacy.
China has too many natural enemies. There are almost 1.4 billion Chinese people, but there are over 2 billion people on China's borders alone who are incredibly suspicious of any move that China makes. We in the United States have done our best to piss the world off over the past 15 years, but we'd have to do a hell of a lot more to make China's neighbors more worried about us than they are about them.
Well, the very definition of a hell of a lot worse would be Donald Trump. It is shocking the degree to which, or at least 2015 me, would have been shocked by the degree to which Donald Trump has kind of, essentially it's vulgar, but wiped his ass with the U.S. alliance structure. He has abused our allies. He is threatening to invade multiple allies. He has somehow found a way to make the United States massively threatening to our own allies. It is absolutely crazy. In 2015, I think in April 2015, I don't think Donald Trump had started officially running yet. I think it was already, as it had been for years, an established joke that he might run. But in 2015, I could not have imagined how much worse the United States would look on this front than China, with alliance structures and what have you. What's kind of extraordinary is that even with Donald Trump being the president of the United States for 4 of the past 10 years, the alliance structure survived kind of like unharmed. I think a lot of people were put off by those 4 years of Trump. A lot of the people were horrified by those 4 years of Trump, but the U.S. alliance structure survived, which is kind of a testament to what I was saying about China being surrounded by natural enemies. Even after Donald Trump, had moved off of the stage, people in the world knew that a Donald Trump was possible, or that a renewed Donald Trump presidency was possible, that the United States could be this brutal to their allies. But at the end of the day, everybody was still more scared of China. That's just sort of where we were. Of course, then Donald Trump was reelected by the United States. And I think that really undermines everything about U.S. empire, the continued ability of the United States to be at the center of the world trade system, to be at the center of the world financial and currency systems. All of this stuff is very seriously up in the air. In the first Trump term, Trump was constrained by a lot of people in the Republican Party, certainly by the Democrats, a lot of people in big business, a lot of people throughout other, pockets of power in the United States. This time around, most people seem to be lining up behind him in a really kind of craven and cowardly way. So it's getting a lot harder to say, oh, this guy's just an aberration, he can't really do much. He is doing stuff. We are in a context where, the United States stock market, the United States dollar, and the United States debt is all falling at the same time. And that's new. That's definitely new. And it is an indication that everybody is getting real sick of the United States and this guy we keep electing president. However, I don't think it's actually going to end U.S. empire, U.S. dominance. At the end of the day, this guy can only be president for another 45 months, and then he's done. And then we're going to move on to, a different approach to things. Will U.S. empire survive the next 45 months? I think almost certainly. In fact, it could end up getting more solidified, consolidated in a really gross way. But it's important to emphasize that whether U.S. empire lasts the next 45 months of Trump or does not, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is whether or not China would be able to replace the United States empire if it collapsed entirely. And I think the answer to that is well, no. Whether the United States is still on offer as a plausible partner or not, the neighbors of China are going to continue to be more afraid of China than they are of the United States. If Trump is successful, is that the term? If Trump manages to destroy U.S. empire or completely reorganize the world trading situation so that the rest of the world is no longer as dependent upon us, or we are liberated from the world, or the world is liberated from us, that would actually make China's neighbors more worried about China, because there wouldn't be any kind of threat or coercion or issue with the United States. The United States would just be this weird basket case on the other side of the world. And then Japan and Southeast Asia would be more concerned about, okay, how do we manage this one massively powerful country that sits in the middle of us, rather than having to deal with the United States anymore. And I think that would kind of supercharge this third issue that I was talking about, this third reason, and really the main reason why China will never be able to rule the world.
The third mover disadvantage. You guys know what the first mover advantage is, right? In any field, the first entity to get there gets away with a lot, both in terms of the amount of money they make and the way they get to set the rules of the game going forward. In the field of world dominance, the British Empire was the first mover. Before the Industrial Revolution, there wasn't a way for any one country to dominate the planet. The British took physical territory everywhere, for centuries in some places, and the world is still recovering from the savage mess they made of things. The US is the second mover. Even though we've had less real competition and vastly more resources and manpower than the United Kingdom, we've managed to do much less with our time on top. Our two post-World War II land grabs have both been dramatic failures. We've certainly caused our share of damage, but we've always had to cook up elaborate justifications for our brutality. Forces like nationalism, international institutions, powerful visual media, and the public refusal to accept dead soldiers continue to work to make overt empire impossible. The Chinese are already as constrained as we are. Over 50 years, and with 450 Chinese people for every Tibetan, China has failed to crush that country's national aspirations. Imagine the British Empire having similar troubles with the Isle of Man, and you'll get a sense of what a different world we live in. China will probably be the world's most powerful country at some point, but they will never be able to be as dominant as we were. This is good news for everybody else, but it's great news for China. The US and China will never need to come into armed conflict because the prize of top dog in the 21st century isn't worth having. If we work together, everybody wins. Washington, D.C. and Beijing don't seem to have quite figured this out yet. It's our responsibility to teach them. Thanks for watching.
So there's a dirty secret about this video that I made 10 years ago. I wanted to have 3 reasons why China would never rule the world, but I really only had one. And I think you can tell by the amount of time I spent on it that this was the main issue that I was thinking about. It was that third mover disadvantage. The world was knit together by the British violently. It was further knitted together by the United States, and the United States was able to do vastly fewer things than the much weaker British Empire had been able to do. So even if China ends up being infinitely more wealthy, infinitely more developed, with, my gosh, it almost seems like they already are getting there with their flying cars and their EVs that function well. Some of that's public relations, some of that might actually be true. And even if China ends up, overcoming its demographic problems, its many other problems, and reaching new levels of wealth and technological power that the United States could only dream of, even if that happens, China's still not going to be as powerful as the United States was, or is able to control the lives of everywhere in the world the way the United States was, just as the United States was never able to be as powerful as Britain was, despite the fact that Britain was a lot weaker than the United States was. I firmly still believe that that's the case. My faith in a peaceful world has diminished from where it was 10 years ago. I am getting less and less confident that the United States is going to, A, be able to maintain our dominance for the rest of the century, or B, that the United States is going to allow our dominance to slip away in any peaceful manner. Trump is much louder and uglier in his presentation, but Donald Trump appears to be pretty bloodthirsty and chaos thirsty, but so was Joe Biden. So is Washington, D.C. more broadly. It's not just these presidents that we elect that seem to love war and destruction and beating up on our alliance structures. It's also just the broader infrastructure in the United States. 2015 is also the 10-year anniversary of Harvard University, the Atlantic, the Harvard Belfer Center, a professor named Graham Allison, making a pretty ridiculous prediction.
Could the U.S. and China find themselves at war in the decade ahead? That seems inconceivable to most of us, but on the historical record, it's more likely than not.
Wow, that's terrifying. That's a Harvard professor saying we're going to war with China within the next 10 years because history says so. Is this really true? Not at all. And today we'll look at why that is.
So the Thucydides trap idea that this guy was selling, the idea that China and the United States were doomed to war within the next 10 years, has now officially expired. These guys were wrong about that. Quite clearly. They were wrong, I was right, neener. But that doesn't mean that Washington, D.C. and the broader military-industrial complex is going to stop pushing towards war. That's probably the main change between today's video and this video from 10 years ago. I think that the same dynamics stand in the way of China ever ruling the world. And I thought back then that China coming to that realization and the United States coming to that realization, the rest of the world coming to that realization would lead to peace and the ability to all work together and put together a system that worked better for everybody. And I was a lot more optimistic 10 years ago. Today, I'm pretty convinced that it's the United States that is the problem. China doesn't, I used to say for years, made both, China, Russia, and the United States all need to be contained. It's the other countries have been contained. It's the United States that needs containing. It's Biden that has been incredibly bloodthirsty in the Middle East, and I would argue in Ukraine, but of course aided by Russia, who should not have invaded its neighbor, as we had tried to get them to do for a decade. And Trump, who's just trying to burn everything down rather than allow the United States to preside over this system that we've created for very much longer. And outside of those two presidents, actually, like Washington, D.C.'s baseline, like the adults in the room, are even worse. The Thucydides trap has expired, but I'm sure that Harvard and the Atlantic are cooking up some other reason why war is inevitable. It's not China that wants war, it's the United States, despite the fact that that's the worst case scenario for the end of U.S. power, is losing a big war with China. And we're pretty much guaranteed to lose at this point, as I've pointed out in other videos. Anyway, so that is what I have to say. No, China is not going to rule the world. The United States is going to continue to rule the world, but it's going to get worse and worse. Not leaving it on... I don't think I was wrong 10 years ago. I think I was just too optimistic 10 years ago. Kind of grim, but there we are. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'd be honored if you considered supporting this channel by signing up at the Patreon link here. Thanks.